It was the last great roar of British industry, a machine so powerful, so overbuilt, it could haul a 60-ton tank through a war zone without flinching. The Scammell Commander wasn't just a military truck, it was a symbol of everything Britain once stood for: grit, strength, and pride in engineering. But behind the steel was a dying legacy. This is how one machine marked the end of an era. The story of Scammell begins not with trucks, but with wooden wheels. In the early 19th century, the Scammell family were coach builders in Spitalfields, London, producing horse-drawn wagons for local trade. George Scammell's son, Richard, carried the business into the industrial age. By the early 1900s, they were servicing mechanical vehicles for Foden, Sentinel, and other steam-powered brands. The real turning point came in 1921, when the company partnered with naval engineer Percy G. Mackley. Together, they developed a unique articulated six-wheeled tractor that could legally carry heavy loads without exceeding axle weight limits. This design, featuring a single front wheel and a narrow steering pivot, gave birth to Scammell Lorries Limited. The innovation was a game-changer. Scammell's mechanical horse and later the Scarabs became staples for British Railways, the Royal Mail, and dock transport. They were agile, reliable, and designed specifically for tight urban turns and narrow loading bays. By the 1930s, Scammell had become a key supplier to the British Army as well, producing the Pioneer, a 6x4 off-road vehicle capable of towing tanks and field artillery, used extensively in World War II. Scammell built a reputation for over-engineered, mission-critical vehicles. The Constructor and Mountaineer series became legends in civil engineering and logging, especially across the colonies. In 1955, Scammell was acquired by Leland Motors, which absorbed the brand into its growing commercial empire. While this provided funding and a national footprint, it also signaled the end of Scammell's independence. Even under new ownership, the Watford factory kept producing original designs, refusing to follow trends in favour of what worked. But the market was shifting, and soon Scammell would be asked to build one final machine, its biggest, boldest, and last. Quick stop. Loving the story so far? Tap like, hit subscribe, and tell us your favourite Scammell in the comments. We're just getting started. By the late 1970s, the British Army's Thornycroft Antar tank transporters were nearing obsolescence. Designed in the 1950s, they couldn't cope with the weight of newer main battle tanks like the Chieftain and the upcoming Challenger 1. A modern replacement was urgently needed, something faster, stronger, and built for the demands of Cold War mobility. Scammell, with decades of experience in military haulage, was chosen to deliver the answer. That answer was the Scammell Commander, a 6x4 heavy equipment transporter that redefined British military logistics. It was powered by the Rolls-Royce CV12 TCE V12 diesel engine, the same 26-litre unit used in the Challenger 1 tank. Producing around 525 brake horsepower, it offered unmatched pulling power and durability. A ZF 16-speed manual gearbox paired with cross-axle differential locks allowed it to manage steep gradients and off-road conditions with ease. The Commander could tow payloads over 60 tons at speeds approaching 55 miles per hour on road, even when coupled with the massive King GTS 100 low-loader trailer. The cab was military-grade, featuring air conditioning, nuclear biological chemical or NBC filtration, and blast resistance. It was designed not just for transport, but for war zone deployment. Production began in 1983, and by 1985, 125 units had entered service with the British Army. They primarily operated with the Royal Corps of Transport and later the Royal Logistics Corps, playing key roles in both NATO exercises and later Gulf War deployments. The Commander was a triumph, over-engineered, rugged, and tailored for purpose. But while the vehicle itself met every demand, Scammell as a company was entering a period of irreversible decline. The world around it was changing fast, and the Commander, brilliant as it was, would be their final masterpiece. By the early 1980s, Scammell was producing one of the most capable military vehicles in the world. But behind the scenes, the company was under pressure from forces far beyond engineering. The broader context was brutal. Britain's heavy industry was in freefall. Under Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, the government shifted away from subsidizing traditional manufacturing and towards a free market economy. Coal, steel, shipbuilding, and vehicle manufacturing faced privatization, foreign competition, and widespread closure. Scammell, absorbed into Leland Motors since 1955, was now part of Leland Vehicles Limited, itself a division of British Leland, a sprawling state-owned conglomerate struggling with debt, mismanagement, and political interference. By 1986, Leland was desperate for restructuring, and military contracts weren't enough to keep every factory running. Though the Commander was a success, it was a niche product. Only 125 units were ordered, enough to serve the Army's core needs, but not enough to sustain a full production line. Civilian truck models like the Contractor and Routeman had been discontinued years earlier. Badge-engineered replacements built on foreign drivetrains lacked Scammell's unique identity and failed to attract buyers. Then came the final blow. In 1987, Leland Trucks was sold to DAF BV, the Dutch manufacturer. DAF had no strategic interest in maintaining the Scammell brand or its Watford facility. The Commander contract was completed, and soon after, the factory was shut down. By July 1988, Scammell was officially no more. A company that had served Britain in 2 world wars, pioneered heavy haulage, and delivered one of the greatest tank transporters in modern history, silenced. Not because it failed to innovate, but because the ground beneath it shifted too fast to recover. Though only 125 Scammell Commanders were built, their legacy far outlived the factory that birthed them. These trucks were not just powerful, they were dependable, durable, and battle-proven. In 1990 to 91, during Operation Granby, the British component of the Gulf War, Scammell Commanders were deployed to transport Challenger 1 tanks, bridging equipment, and recovery vehicles across the deserts of Saudi Arabia and Iraq. Despite extreme heat, heavy sand loads, and long distances, the Commander proved its worth. It towed 60-ton payloads through conditions that would cripple lesser machines. The British Army continued to operate the Commander well into the early 2000s, long after Scammell had closed. Its reliability, ease of field maintenance, and raw torque made it difficult to replace. Eventually, however, the fleet was retired and replaced by the Oshkosh M1070F, a more modern but less character-rich American design. Today, surviving Commanders are rare but revered. A small number are preserved in museums or owned by private collectors. Some are even still road legal, appearing at military vehicle shows and classic truck rallies across the UK. Enthusiasts value them not just for their engineering, but for what they represent. The end of an era when Britain still designed and built its own heavy-duty military hardware, from the ground up. The Commander wasn't a commercial success in volume. It didn't save Scammell from collapse, but it stood as proof. Final, undeniable proof that British engineering could still compete on the world stage. It was the last word in a language Scammell had spoken for nearly 70 years. Strength, utility, and resilience. And though the company vanished, the Commander made sure it didn't go quietly. When the Scammell factory in North Watford closed its gates in 1988, it wasn't just another industry layoff, it was the end of a culture. The site on Tollpits Lane had been Scammell's home for decades. Generations of engineers, welders, and draftsmen passed through its doors. It was a place where apprentices learned to shape steel by hand, and where design teams created trucks from scratch, not from spreadsheets, but from intuition and battlefield experience. These weren't vehicles built for style or mass production. They were built to solve problems, to pull tanks out of ditches, to survive artillery shockwaves, to last 30 years under the worst conditions imaginable. The loss of Scammell wasn't just economic, it was symbolic. Britain didn't just lose a truck brand, it lost a piece of its industrial soul. After closure, the site was cleared. Today it houses business parks and retail units. Nothing remains of the original workshops, test yards, or gantries where pioneers and commanders once rolled off the lines. But traces survive. Some Scammell veterans still gather at truck rallies, preserving the memory of the machines they built. Retired engineers remember design details from memory. Collectors start the old Commanders just to hear the CV-12 engine roar one more time. In 2016, Watford Borough Council approved a commemorative plaque on the original factory site, one small gesture to honour a giant legacy. What was lost in 1988 wasn't just a building or a brand, it was the last major piece of British military truck-making capability, and no one has replaced it since. In hindsight, many believe Scammell could have been saved, if anyone in power had truly wanted it to survive. In the 1980s, Britain was prioritising leaner, more cost-efficient logistics, but the military still needed rugged transport. Scammell's engineering expertise, especially in off-road high-payload vehicles, remained unmatched in the UK. If properly funded, the company could have transitioned into a defence-focused specialist, building on the success of the Commander and the Pioneer legacy. There were options. Scammell could have pivoted toward export contracts, targeting allies needing heavy haulage solutions. Alternatively, it could have operated as a dedicated military contractor under the Ministry of Defence, similar to how Germany supported MAN or the US-backed Oshkosh. But none of that happened. When Leland Trucks merged with DAF in 1987, preserving Scammell wasn't part of the plan. DAF already had its own heavy vehicle lineup. Scammell's low-volume, high-complexity production model didn't fit their business goals, so it was closed, not because it failed, but because it didn't scale. What's most ironic is that today, the kind of vehicles Scammell excelled at, ultra-reliable, off-road capable military logistics platforms, are once again in demand. Global conflict zones, humanitarian crises, and NATO logistics exercises all require trucks that can do exactly what the Commander was built to do. But no British company builds them anymore. In an era obsessed with innovation, Scammell died not from irrelevance, but from corporate indifference. Its expertise was never replaced, its workforce was scattered, and its legacy now lives on only in memories, museums, and the few roaring survivors still rolling. Could it have survived? Absolutely. But survival needs more than skill. It needs someone willing to fight for it. The Scammell Commander wasn't just a truck, it was a parting shot, a mechanical last stand built with everything Scammell had left: strength, soul, and steel. It hauled Britain's tanks, carried its engineers, and proved one final time that British heavy machinery could still lead the world. But even legends get no mercy in the marketplace. When the gates at Watford closed, it marked more than the end of a company. It ended a chapter of British industry where grit meant more than growth targets, and where trucks were built not just to move, but to endure. The Commander still turns heads today, not because it's pretty, but because it's real. If this story hit you like a steel punch to the chest, hit that like button and subscribe for more forgotten legends of British engineering. Got a favourite Scammell memory? Drop it in the comments. Let's keep the story alive.